Pearl Harbor. An hour later, U.S. Army operators saw a large mass of airplanes coming toward Honolulu on their radar scope. They assumed that what they saw on their scopes were American planes. Just then, the lead Japanese pilot, Mitsuo Fuchida, who was circling just north of Oahu, slid back the canopy on his Nakajima torpedo bomber. He fired a single flare out the window from his Kayaba signal pistol. The flare lit up the early morning sky, giving the pilots the final go signal. The weather was favorable, with spotty clouds. They dropped altitude and approached the target from the southern side of the island. A few minutes later, Fuchida saw the American ships in Pearl Harbor. It was a quiet Sunday morning, and many of the American sailors were asleep. Within an hour, thousands of them were dead, and the U.S. Pacific Fleet was in ruins. In the days after the attack, much of America was consumed with three thoughts. What happened? How do we get revenge on the Japanese? And whose fault was it? A few days later, J. Edgar Hoover wrote to President Roosevelt, saying the surprise was the fault of the commanders on the ground and of the U.S. Navy's Office of Naval Intelligence. ONI, the part known today as NCIS, the agency in charge of anticipating threats from foreign navies. Hoover pointed out, correctly, that ONI was in chaos. The director had just started his job 3 weeks before, and he was the fourth director just that year. With the press and the American people crying for blood, the U.S. government kicked off the initial investigation into what happened. However, a thorough investigation wasn't possible because of the need to keep secret the existence of the magic program. As Hoover had hoped, and intended, the conclusion pointed fingers at the commanders on the scene, Admiral Kimmel and Army General Walter Short, as practically the only guilty parties. They were removed from command and lowered in rank. In 1944, the Secretary of War kicked off a larger investigation led by Henry Clawson of the Judge Advocate General, JAG Department. Clawson published an 800-page report that spread the blame beyond just the two men on the scene. To come to this conclusion, he had full access to the magic files, and he interviewed or had access to over 100 people, including the heads of the Navy and U.S. Naval Intelligence, the Army, General Douglas MacArthur, the Secretary of State, the Office of the President, but strangely, no one from FBI headquarters. In 1982, John Toland asserted in his book Infamy that much of the blame for the surprise at Pearl Harbor lay with unnamed higher-ups in Washington. There wasn't much public evidence at that time that would have pointed any blame at the FBI. However, a recently released FBI file shows that an agent wrote a memo about a Japanese spy known as Agent Shinkawa. In the file, the FBI agent says that this mysterious Japanese agent had flipped and become a spy for the United States Navy. A message came directly from Hoover, saying to not talk about Shinkawa to anyone outside the agency, because it was highly embarrassing to the FBI. Only now can the full story of Agent Shinkawa be told. The FBI has recently released about 2/3 of Shinkawa's files. In Britain, MI5 has transparently released over 1,000 pages of files on the man. In 1945, Japanese Navy intelligence officers burned their files.